Welcome, everybody. My name is Susan Barber, and I'm the Community Education Manager at Mission Hospice and Home Care. And I want to welcome you all for today's community conversation with Dale Larson on the helper's journey and the role of caregivers and the plight of caregivers and the benefit of caregiving. And Dwight Dale was with us a few months ago for an author talk, and it was so well received, I've invited him back for today's community conversation. Just a couple of words I want to say about Mission Hospice. We are a small, non-affiliated and a not-for-profit hospice located in San Mateo County, which is the area just below San Francisco and just above San Jose. And so we serve a very diverse clientele of people from the coast side, which are largely migrant farm workers, families, and then also to Silicon Valley. And so we have been here in our community since 1979, founded by two women who became dear friends. One of them was our first patient in 1979, Mac Nash. And her friend that was the co-founder, Helen, lived a very long life. She died at 103 years old in 2014 and got to see the benefit of her work for decades. So we remain grateful for these women that were willing to found Mission Hospice. And we're so grateful to the work that we've been able to do in the community through community education. So having said that, welcome to all of you that are just joining us. And I am going to introduce our guest today. Our guest speaker is Dale Larson, who has been a friend and a colleague, and it's just so wonderful to have him here with us. I think probably Dale can go. He needs no introduction, but I will give a brief one and then invite Dale to introduce himself in the way he would like to. Dale is a professor in the Department of Counseling Psychology at Santa Clara University. He is an author, he's a clinician and a researcher, a Fulbright scholar, fellow in the American Psychological Association, a member of the International Work Group on Death, Dying, and Bereavement. He's published, he had a piece, Finding Our Way, Living with Dying in America, that was inserted into more than 7 million newspapers. He has written this beautiful book, The Helper's Journey, Empathy, Compassion, and the Challenge of Caregiving, which is on its second printing here. And so, Dale, I'm going to turn this over to you so that you can introduce yourself in the way you would like.
Well, thank you so much, Susan, and what a treat to do this with you. You're really a pioneer, and your work has been so fabulous at Mission, and Mission is a real pioneering program. And it's a special honor to do it with your final community education program that you're having, that you're organizing at Mission. So it's really, really very special to me. And I already see some people I know in the group, and I am really very thrilled to have this time with you. I am wanting to try to kind of bring us into this new reality in a way. I know that our backgrounds are such that we're all very familiar with end-of-life issues and challenges that are, present in this incredible work that we're around doing, involved in, receiving care from. But I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about caring for ourselves, and I want to talk about caring for others, and kind of go from big picture right down to almost the cellular level. And it'll be somewhat of a cook's tour of what I've recently put together in my second edition of my book, The Helper's Journey, which is subtitled Empathy, Compassion, and the Challenge of Caring. And I want this to be very interactive. I'm going to be presenting, and along the way, Susan's agreed to, if somebody has a question, to kind of bring it to my attention, and it's okay to insert that into the ongoing presentation. And then we will have extensive time for discussion later. And I'm really, really interested in what everyone has to share in response to what I present today, because I think it's, a group of experts bringing all kinds of wisdom. And let's create a little wisdom circle here, or wisdom squares, if you will, in the Zoom room. So, to just begin, I think we're all in a new place. This COVID experience has led us to a new place in our lives, in our world. if you really think about it, it's not like some of the conversations I have with bereaved parents and other people dealing with major tragedy. It's unimaginable what's happened. If we go back 16, 15 months ago, could we have imagined what happened? 600,000 deaths, lockdown here in California with fires, political mayhem, George Floyd and social justice issues, and then even more recently, San Jose mass shooting, which is shocking enough in itself that we'd have to stop and kind of take a look at what we're experiencing and how we're going to go forward. But it is and what is and was a perfect storm for us in so many different ways. The virus, undermined and our lockdown and responses to it simultaneously undermined all of our, or most of our coping capacities, because we didn't have the social support available to us, which is the key mediator of outcomes when you're dealing with a crisis. So we were isolated. The loneliness factor went through the roof, which is really in itself a tremendous predictor of mortality and major stress syndromes and depression and anxiety. Just loneliness alone. Of course, we've got to recognize this perfect storm. We were, as someone said, it was a perfect storm, but we were in different boats in that storm. So the minorities and disadvantaged and the elderly suffered the most. And I feel very lucky to have been able to sit here in this room I'm in right now, which I'm not in my actual office. I'm at home in my office, and do a lot of webinars and talk to people like you and learn from everyone about what's going on. But there have been so many unfortunate populations and individuals, and I'm sure some of us in this room suffered losses during this that were beyond even our loss of freedom and our loss of security, and that incredible uncertainty that we all experience, all of which contribute to our stress and the need for self-care. I created a little acronym, SCARED, S-C-A-R-D, that I think we're all dealing with right now. Maybe it could be in the DSM-6, which is situational coronavirus activated relational disorder. It's that feeling, how many of you have started hugging people, and that feeling you have in that moment, like, is this really okay? Can I really be with other people? Can I sit at this dinner table without anxiety? So we have to unlearn some of these coping strategies that we had, and decrease some of that anxiety that we've had to protect ourselves. We have to change some of our assumptions we have about life. We're all going to be a little bit, I hope, sadder but wiser about the realities. We are studying this in psychology. We have the COVID stress syndrome, which I won't get into in any depth, but there's research ongoing looking at COVID stress syndrome. There's the COVID stress scale. We're going to be researching this for the next 25 years, maybe longer, trying to understand the impact on us. There's a tsunami of depression, anxiety. The novel coronavirus has created a novel form of traumatic bereavement for us. And we all know about this. We all know why that's the case, having these deathbeds with the loved ones not present. What's it like to be communicating to your loved one through Facebook? What's it as they die? What's it like to not be there? The guilt, the shame, all exacerbated, in this terrible situation that so many people suffered through. And it wasn't just people who lost their loved ones to COVID, it was all bereaved people. So I think we have a real challenge ahead of us in terms of addressing these bereavements that were so woefully incomplete in a way that grief couldn't just work its healing kind of force for us. So it's really a tough situation we're looking at. So, one of the publications we had during this was with the international work groups, in a hospice looking at self-care and saying that all these things were undermined. The seeking social support, music therapy, exercising, proper nutrition, meditation, all these things became more difficult. We had work overload. We had the lockdown that really kept us away from each other, isolation of staff from their own family members, disruption of team member roles, so made teams much more challenging to work on. We had to communicate through Zoom, and we're not able to be with each other and have those conversations in the hallways and get the kind of support we need doing this kind of work. Caregivers feel guilty being away from the clinical environment because things are so desperate. And I've been in touch with so many groups during this time where they're just so overloaded with work. It was unbelievable situations, it's wartime situations. So all those staff, we know from SARS, we know that healthcare professionals after SARS had major post-traumatic, post-stress syndromes and symptoms. We haven't even begun to look at what this is going to be for our current group of health professionals. And the physical strain of wearing protective equipment, very obvious things. The last chapter in my book, I had this quotation, which was really kind of eerily timely, by Paul Ehrlich and Robert Ornstein. He said, all of us citizens of every nation are now in the same family, now in the same boat, walking the same tightrope, like it or not. The worst problems of the human predicament are common to all of us, from climate disruption, loss of biodiversity, and the poisoning of the environment to pandemics, gross economic inequities, and the threat of nuclear war. Our tightrope is the line from humanity's past to its future. So, how are we going to respond to this? How will we address all these fault lines that have been revealed in our society and our world? Will we see our shared humanity and our vital connections with each other? That's the big picture that I wanted to just begin with, because I think it is a challenge for us as a society and as a world. And I want to, for some of us who remember The Day the Earth Stood Still with Sam Jeffy and Michael Rennie, with one of my favorite movies. When I was a kid, when this came on, I would run in and watch it from start to finish. I gave it to tons of kids along the way too. I bought a bunch of these and gave them out to all my relatives and nephews and nieces. And so they could see this, because I think it was so amazing that, this is like COVID arriving in our world and saying, you've got to get it together. You really have to pull together to face things. In this case, they were saying you can't bring your violence into space. We're going to stop you if you don't. But I think it was that same need for us all to pull together and stop, internecine kind of war and make a difference. So I just think that, in a way, The Day the Earth Stood Still is so appropriate. I know with some of my bereaved clients, they said, the world had stopped and my life stopped when I lost my son. And I feel like the world is more in sync with me, but now it's starting to, what my clients are saying is now it's starting to pick up again. And I'm still here. I'm still in a world that's kind of stopped. We all know that from our experiences with bereaved parents and other people. But how can we get through all this? Well, what's interesting is that I think, compassion is going to be the key. And I don't have to say that to this group, obviously. But it's interesting when you look at the word compassion. Well, how can we be guided as we move into the future? Well, if you look at compassion, there is compass in compassion. So I think of compassion, and then we see also passion. So I think of compassion as the compass that can guide our passion as we go forward. And I write about compassion, I write about empathy and altruism and the connections among those. And I really believe that helping others is a natural outflowing of the healthy human heart, that we are wired, and I'll say more about that in a moment, to do these good things with others, to help others. But I think, this is ultimately what we have to turn to. And I'm going to come back to that at the end of my talk today. I say about this, that when we are able to confront and accept loss, which is something I think everyone in this room is very familiar with, this struggle to confront and accept loss and the impermanence of life, which, hey, the rest of the world doesn't always think about this the way we do. Our natural empathy can transform into a deep sense of compassion, binding us in a helping and healing way with the suffering of others. This transformation can serve as a compass to guide our helping journeys and awaken the spirit of caring that resides deep within us. That's kind of my fundamental belief that I've arrived at in over all these years. And I think a sense of loss, having that awareness, it's not a depressing feeling at all. A sense of loss is what underlies and motivates compassion. Because if you don't have that, and so we have it, many of us, because of our experiences in life. That's how we got into this field. And that's what allows us to have our compassion activated in caring for others. So, we are wired to do this. We have all read about the mirror neurons that we are equipped with, that are built into us, that allow us to empathize with others' experiences. We have this tremendous capacity that is built in neurologically. We have an altruistic brain. There is a book by Pfaffen, The Altruistic Brain, which makes this argument, the oxytocin and all the ways that different hormones support us in our altruistic efforts. We know from animal studies, which I always find fascinating, and there are hundreds and hundreds of these showing. Here's an anecdotal thing: a trunkless elephant that was fed by other elephants. They stood in line waiting to feed their trunkless welfare case till it was full, and then they would start to eat their own meals. Rats even will stop shocking other rats, and give up a filet mignon for rats for the lever that gives them a little dried up pellet, as long as it stops the punishment of another rat. What's interesting is if they know the other rat, then they're much more likely to stop punishing the other rat. If they had been cage mates even 6 months ago, and also had they ever been shocked, Shakespeare, he just had scars that never felt a wound. So these animal studies are amazing when you look at them. A blind pelican found up north, how did that survive? Monkeys, same thing. So we have a host of animal studies. If you look at Wall's work, WAAL, you see this. It is built into us. It goes back to our caregiving history, as mammals, really, primarily. And we had to develop this caregiving system to tend to our young. And then that is really the roots of this ability to form an attachment and to work, ultimately as therapists. I would say more about that maybe as we go on. So if you look at yourself, you're probably saying, well, I don't know if I'm that high in empathy. Believe me, you are. I've done research on this. But answer these items. And for yourself, when I'm reading an interesting story or novel, I imagine how I'd feel if the events of the story were happening to me. Use this Likert scale here. After acting in a play myself or seeing a play or movie, I have felt I was partly one of the characters. When I watch a good movie, I can variously put myself in the place of a leading character. So add up your scores. So the average for women on this was 7.6. Men, Ed Holland, I see you're in the room, 7.2. So how many of you scored 8 or above? We could raise our hands, couldn't we? And I would guarantee you that most of us score higher than 7 on this. Well, what does that mean? That means that you have a higher level of empathic capacity than most folks off the street. In fact, your mirror neurons are more robust if you score higher on these items. Isn't that interesting? So your mirror neurons, actually, if we measured them and we had an MRI, you're more active in this way, neurologically. So, that empathy is what you bring to helping and what you bring to caregiving and what we bring to the rest of the world in our caregiving efforts, in our caring efforts. And your motivations that brought you in are also very, very powerful factors that I want to kind of contextualize what we're talking about today. We're talking about the challenge of caring. So what brought you in? Here's where we could have the next hour and a half just spent with us sharing the moments that were significant for us, that brought us into the work. What was it that happened in our lives? How did our empathy become deepened? You might think about yourself, and what point in time did you say, I want to do something related to oncology, to hospice, to social work, to therapy, or caregiving? What is it that brought us in, and what keeps us in? And those motivations are key, because they define what's going to be stressful for us and also what's going to be tremendously rewarding. So there's like a twofold aspect. Our empathy brings us in and makes us a great helper, but at the same time can cause problems. There was a study by Ezra Stalin I've cited 1,000 times, where he found that nurses who scored highest on the items like those were the first to leave the rooms of dying patients. They did the proverbial U-turn at the foot of the bed of the dying patient. But later, when they had training and learned how to communicate their empathy and were able to be effective as nurses, they became the most successful working with patients, as judged by researchers and family members and patients. So our empathy and our helping motivations are double-edged swords. They're what bring you in, but they also can make you vulnerable. So I just like that is an important frame for everything I'm talking about today. And I would encourage you all, maybe when we get to the discussion, to reflect on, what are some of the mission moments. I'd like to kind of end with those today, that really tell you that this is why I'm here. This is what it's about. This is the meaning in my life, because we're going to end with a discussion of meaning and fulfillment in the work. What is it that happens that this is what I needed to be doing with my life. This is what matters, and it is significant for me, and it brings me a kind of fulfillment that other things don't. And when I talk about the challenge of caring, at least I directed more at professional helpers or volunteer helpers, but I summarize it this way, finding a way to be emotionally involved, to maintain your helping motivations, because they can definitely be strained. Empathy, a typo, compassion and commitment, as you courageously, yes, this work is courageous, and I mean that, this work is courageous. Help people live with hope in a world where loss is inescapable. And I hope this typo isn't in my actual book. That's one concern I have. We'll get to self-compassion later on. So I hope that makes sense to you. How do you do this? How do you maintain this compassion? How do you maintain your empathy? And put it to work without burning out? That's the challenge, isn't it? And that's kind of what we'll be talking about. So what can we do to enhance our resilience? And the point I want to make about resilience to outset is that resilience is not a trait, it's an outcome. People think about it as a trait, like, well, either Susan's resilient or Betsy's resilient, so that's why they're doing okay, but Dale's not resilient, that's why he's struggling with burnout. That's the wrong attribution with this, right? First of all, it's almost always the environment that we should look to first, and I'll say more about that in a few minutes. We need to understand that it's not a fixed trait. We can enhance and increase our resilience, our emotional resilience, our moral resilience when we start talking about moral, kinds of challenges. Our team resilience, so we can learn to adapt, manage, and negotiate adversity. And so the resilient outcome is the positive outcome in the face of adversity. That's what resilience is. It isn't a personality attribute. It's very important to make that point. So here's some things I'm going to go through very quickly. But before I do that, I'd like to ask us all to reflect for a moment. Okay, we've just been through, and we're still going through, a very difficult, crazy time. Everybody agree? I think you could raise your hand. Betsy, I can see your hand if you raise it. Yes, she agrees. What are you going to do? Yeah, so we've just been through the most unbelievable period, right? Where we've been stressed and strained, and unless you move to some remote spot, even then it could be stressful, right? Just the isolation. So put in the chat just quickly, and we won't have time to review them all, but just for own personal kind of reasons too, and we'll take a quick look at them for just a couple of minutes. What is it that you found was most helpful to you in terms of managing the stress and strengthening your resilience? Just in a word or two. Was it your pet? Was it your exercise? Was it your loved ones being with you? What was it? Was it Netflix? No, but if it was Netflix, then it was Netflix. But what everybody share in chat, just one or two words. And this is important because what works for you is what you're going to need to focus on. And at the end of today, I'm hoping that we can all agree. This is kind of a motivational intervention I'm making right now. We will all agree. I'm going to ask you at the end. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do for yourself in terms of self-care and stress management? But let's look at what people put in to the chat. So share in the chat. Yoga, I'd like to hear Dale talk more about. Oh, it flies by, doesn't it? That's the only problem with this. Let me go. Hiking, yoga, and connections on Zoom. Connection with friends and family. Look how this chair yoga. All right. Telling myself this too will end. A listening friend. Yes. Connecting through Zoom. Garden and hummingbirds. Oh, yes. Oh, it's been important for me too. Choice in how I feel for the most part. Yes. Getting in touch with that. Adult coloring. Listening to the birds. Yeah, I had never heard them before in my backyard, my beautiful garden my wife has created. Dogs, walking in nature, connection with friends and family. Look at those. Pets, music, spouse, exercise and phone calls, meditation, staying connected with others, even over Zoom. Reminding myself this is limited. Will the slides be available? No, they won't. I can't. I have too many proprietary things in here that I can't release. Please raise your hand. Oh yeah, let's see. Meditation, a listening friend. Well, wonderful. Okay, connecting through Zoom. Look at those. I focused on what was my purpose, mission, and growth areas when COVID-19. I wanted to be able to have a productive story, but how I responded to this situation. Yeah, we all have lecture material for the rest of our lives, that's for sure, I'll tell you. And teaching. What are the lessons of this? Walking alone in a lonely area. Lonely area. Okay. It'll be up. Okay, that's good. Okay, good. Oh, I'm gonna.
Gail,
Okay.
it's
Yes.
Susan. And we also have somebody that would just mentioned in the chat a question. If you could speak about resilience in terms of not just a character trait. I'd like to hear Daryl talk more about resilience as an outcome more than a personality trait. And if there's anything that you could say about that difference or.
Well, I already have, but what I'm going to get to that as we go along.
Thank
So
you.
I'm going to frame everything that way actually as we go along. So and thank you. That's really good to keep that focus. So let's jump into this quickly, okay? And I'm seeing, obviously there's so much to respond to, but whatever you entered in the chat, keep that in mind. Like that's working for you. You've identified something in a very stressful time that actually works. And there is no silver bullet. There is no magical thing that's going to work for everyone. The list I'm going to go through of different kinds of things, some of them will work for some people and not work for others. We have to find for ourselves what works for us, and then put that to work. And that's always the challenge, isn't it? Because how much time do we have for stress management? So I wanted to start with just this one core idea. And I was a student of Dick Lazarus at Berkeley. Dick, of course, was one of the foremost stress theorists of the 20th century, I think the most foremost. And Dick's model was very simple. He had an appraisal model because what we've learned over time was that just negative life events, different kinds of life events weren't predicting health outcomes fully, not accounting for enough of the variance. So you had to look at the appraisal of this experience, of this event. And that's what Dick introduced. And he said, how are we appraising things? So am I okay? Initial appraisal. If I'm okay, then we don't have a stress response. Second appraisal, though, if I do say, I'm not okay, whatever, COVID, I'm isolated, my finances are strained, etc. My relationship is damaged. Then we have the stress cycle about to ensue. But if we then have the second appraisal be, I can cope with it, then you don't go into the stress cycle because I have resources, I have social support, I have good self-esteem. These are what we call mediators in research. So the mediators are critical, and that's where most of these resilience enhancing strategies and processes reside, is in the mediators. So you have an event and you have an outcome, and between that you have the appraisal process. And of course you want to change the demands on you as your initial response to anything that's stressful. So let's get rid of COVID, or let's change our environment, or do something, to make things less stressful. But stress is always going to happen. Things are not going to completely settle down even after COVID. And so we're always going to have demands on us. So then you can change your appraisal of the situation, see a challenge, not a threat. Constantly seeing threats is going to create this stress cycle for us. How we appraise things is critical, and that's what Dick Lazarus really brought home. And then, of course, even no matter what you do, you're going to have stress hormones coursing through your system, and that's where I saw so many of us said yoga, exercise, walking, nature, things like that can really make a difference in terms of emotional regulation and reducing the stress hormones. So fundamental point is how we see things, changing our perspective. And I saw some of that in the chat box too, we can talk about later. What's interesting now is recent research really looking at how all this plays out at a cellular level. These telomeres are these nucleoproteins that are on the tips of your chromosomes, and what they do is they prevent replicative senescence, and all the diseases, most of the diseases of aging and cancer and everything, kind of go along with shortened telomeres. So because they're like the eglets on your shoelaces, and when they are not really doing well, then you have a real problem, and chromosomes get really wild, and you have the diseases of aging more likely. In fact, if you have adverse childhood experiences, you have shortened telomeres, even much earlier in your life. So I had lunch with Elizabeth Blackburn, the Nobel laureate, who got her Nobel Prize for studying telomeres, and she told me that they did a study with meditation and found that that would actually improve telomere health, just putting people on I think it was like a 16-week meditation program. Amazing kind of effect at the cellular level. So someday we'll be going to Walgreens and getting our telomeres measured, but it's not happening yet. But it's interesting, isn't it, how our stress is reflected in these biological markers. So another point, without depressing us too much, I just want to say that we have to look at burnout and these other experiences primarily so we know, like, hey, got to do something for myself. That's the key thing. Wei Ji, the Chinese word for, the Mandarin word for crisis, danger, and opportunity. So burnout is reduced personal accomplishment. This is Chris Maslow, who was also at Berkeley when I was there, are the three main characteristics, hallmark characteristics of burnout. Reduced personal accomplishment. I just can't do well at doing good. And then you end up demoralized. And what you have to do is restore efficacy, a sense of efficacy. Diminished caring. You're not feeling like seeing patients or being with the people you're supposed to be caring for. So you have this kind of depersonalization, and you end up being cynical. So these are the hallmark characteristics. But the number one is emotional exhaustion. You go from high energy to fatigue. And this is familiar to all of us, but some of us are members of the formerly burned out club. I imagine probably everybody in this room is a member of the formerly burned out club. But the important thing there is that you can burn out and come back. So don't think of it as it's over when you're having this experience of burnout. And I've studied this for quite a while, but I think the key point, and come back to the trait and context issue. Chris Maslow said, burnout doesn't result from a genetic predisposition to grumpiness, a depressive personality, or general weakness, which is what some supervisors sometimes say about their employees. It is not caused by a failure of character or a lack of ambition. It is not a personality defect or clinical syndrome. It's an occupational problem. Lee Ross, who is a professor at Stanford, famous professor, he died just a few days ago, and he did the initial work on the fundamental attribution error, which is we tend to overly attribute to the situation, over attribute to the individual, and under attribute to the situation. And this is so true with burnout. When we see someone burning out, we say, oh, they must not have the coping capacity. Oh, they must be codependent, blah, blah, blah. And instead, we need to look at the context. All of us could be burned out pretty quickly if we changed our environment in a certain directions, gave us a certain patient load if you're a health provider, just change the dynamics at work, lack of support, et cetera. COVID, let's just go through it all. Context that can create problems for us. So burnout is not a personal failing. It's very important to get that across. And this is one of the major concepts in psychology, this fundamental attribution error has been applied everywhere. There was a good article in the New York Times today about it with Lee Ross's death. Okay, so this study, big study, for those of you who are actively working as clinicians, found high levels of burnout using the Maslach burnout inventory. He found that 60% were high on emotional exhaustion, 24% high on depersonalization. These were hospice and palliative care clinicians in the US. Some good news, only 4% were downhearted and blue most of the time. So if you're not feeling downhearted and blue most of the time, I hope you're not, then you're in that category. And you're not in that downhearted and blue, which I hope is true for you. So the other one of these, I call them the troubling trifecta, is compassion fatigue, which is secondary traumatic stress disorder. If you were a nurse, and maybe some of us are in nursing, we were in with COVID patients or with other patients dying, and holding that iPhone, this is traumatic. There is no way around it. We are around people who are suffering, people desperate to be with their loved ones. There are just so many instances of trauma in all this. And of course, we have the mass shooting, et cetera, which is, of course, ground zero for PTSD for everyone there. And they're going to be putting that together, the people together, for a long time there. I have some students who had worked nearby there, and their husbands worked there too, and tremendously impactful. And then we have moral distress, which is the other piece of this. And this has just been a big factor with COVID, where you believe you know the correct thing to do, but someone restricts your ability. You don't have enough PPE. You don't have ventilators. When you're triaging ventilators, that is a source of moral distress. And if someone had that experience, we could share during that discussion. Examples are life support against patient wishes, which I've been around a lot. Life support when not in the best interest of the patient. When you're feeling like we don't have staffing, inadequate pain relief, so common, isn't it, with people treating patients and they don't really have great pain management skills because the patient hasn't gotten a hospice yet with better pain management. So moral distress is, so what do we have to counter that? We have moral courage, moral resilience, and we have to do the right thing and get support for that. And this is a big challenge. And this is a bigger issue in our country. Al Bandura here at Stanford has, I think, one of the most significant books of the 20th century, the 21st century. I think it might have come out, it came out recently. Moral disengagement, looking at the whole picture of the ways that we are challenged morally today. A brilliant book. I was encouraging him with that. One of my special areas that I research is self-concealment, and I just want to make a comment on it. It's a concealment from others of information that one perceives as negative or distressing. Well, that just amplifies all these problems. There are more than 200 empirical studies now looking at self-concealment in almost every context you can imagine, and related to depression, anxiety, suicidality, across the board. Very powerful variable. And, it basically goes back to, we seek connection, but we fear rejection. So when we have something that we don't feel good about, shameful something, or stigmatized condition, usually very often a concealable stigmatized condition, then we don't feel comfortable sharing it. And there's a lot of COVID shaming going on, and we have research now showing that people are concealing what they did during COVID. Did they not act in a prudent fashion? Did they have symptoms that they didn't tell anyone about because they were afraid that they would alienate people, etc.? So there's a lot of concealment going on. This goes back to earlier studies by Jamie Pennebaker, where he talked about the act of confiding, discussing or confiding, maybe not doing that may be more damaging than have experienced the event per se, which led to the writing cure and all the journaling that probably some of us have been doing or having our clients do. Very tremendous effects for just writing about one's traumas and one's difficulties. And what's come out of this research earlier on by Dan Wegner is that we can't really cope with these difficult inner experiences by suppressing. So he did studies called the white bear studies, where he found that if you tell people, don't think about a white bear, so all of you don't think about a white bear right now, okay? So it's out of your mind, but the problem is it comes back, doesn't it? So you try not to think about something and then it comes back. So suppression does not work. We have to accept our inner experiences. We have to face them. And just like grief, there's no way around grief. It has its own timetable, but you have to ultimately accept it. And this is not just me, this is Strobe and everyone else and Warden and on down the line saying the same thing. So this white bear keeps coming back. And self-concealment is a problem. There's a private zone and there's a secret zone. It's, there's some secrets we possess that are no problem. There are other secrets that possess us. And this is when it gets to be a problem, when the urge to reveal conflicts with the urge to conceal, because the urge to reveal is ancestral playing behavior. When we have distress, just like an infant, you want to communicate that to others in your environment, ideally someone who's supportive and caring, so we have an attachment experience with them. So I could say a lot more about this, but this is an interesting study by Mike Slepian at Columbia, who researches secrets. And he asked, there were two groups in the study. One group just had them think about a big secret in their life. That's it. And then the other group think about a small secret. The people who thought about a big secret estimated the steepness of this hillside as greater, the gradient as greater than those who thought about a small secret. Also, you estimate the weight of things as heavier if you think about a big secret, and the distances, etc. There's a burdensome aspect to secrets, and that's a big theme in my work. I've done things with secret-related kinds of interventions. So retreat, I did a weekend with cancer patients. And recently diagnosed cancer patients. It was a fantastic experience for me working as a volunteer with hospice folks and oncologists and social workers, and had the participants write out a fear on one apple, and then on the other side write out a hope. And we read these first in the group with a group of strangers, and then turned them over and read these. And by the end of reading these, total strangers were holding hands, and we had brought all of these things into play and for the rest of the weekend. It was just an absolutely powerful experience. We have secrets as helpers. Sometimes I'm so angry, the patient is very demanding, wanting something every 5 minutes, putting the call in. Then I feel guilty because they're the ones who are suffering and dying, and I'm the fortunate one. I'm sure some of us have felt this way. I'm healthy and able to go on with my life. And I say to myself, how could you be so uncaring and selfish? You should be doing something else, like working at Kmart. I've studied helper secrets extensively, different categories of them. But these are the things we keep inside, which increase our stress. And if you're a family caregiver, it's the same thing. If you keep that inside and you're not able to disclose it to a trusted confidant, not to everyone, not on Facebook, but to a trusted confidant, I think it can make a huge difference. One time I did a top 10 list of burnout symptoms, and number 10 was shopping at Kmart feels like I'm taking good care of myself. Now, people have argued that that really is taking good care of myself, but anyhow. And we have secrets in bereavement, hidden grief, disenfranchised loss. I mean, it's just a huge rumination, complicated mourning, post-mortem surprises. Who was this guy who had a separate family that I didn't know about, etc. You know, there's just so much here in terms of secrets that we, in those end-of-life conversations, the unfinished business, you know, this is familiar to all of us. So secrets, you know, are a huge factor in everyday life and in our lives, and they can create enormous problems. In my book, I talk about a example of a Korean veteran who shared with a social worker about the war being such a waste. And it turns out he had never even shared that he was in the war with his sons. They didn't even know it. And he shared it on his deathbed in this poignant confession. Betty Farrell has done some great work on confessions of people, two nurses near the end of life, about difficult experiences in their lives. Very wonderful study. So we've got to counteract secrets by finding someone to disclose to, at least writing it out ourselves, confronting that so it doesn't get trapped in this echo chamber. We've got to practice balanced empathy, and some of you have heard me speak before, and you know, I always show this old slide, but it's, you know, we've got to find a way to be in a balanced position, and you know, where we can reach in, become more emotionally involved when we need to with patients and families, and less involved when we need to as well, and not end up at the extremes, which are where we have personal distress at each end of this continuum. We know that personal distress doesn't help. It derails the natural empathic process. We've got to stay over here. So that's the challenge in terms of the challenge of caring. More time over here, less time over here, because if you're over here, you're going to burn out and you're going to have issues. So personal distress derails empathy and creates more stress for us. And that's a whole bigger conversation. How can we reach into what I call the helper's pit and help people out of it without falling into that pit ourselves? And that's where our resilience enhancing efforts come into play, where we have the skills, we have the well-being that we can tap into so we can be there. We have also the need to be mindful. And you know, what mindfulness has become so popular that, you know, we hear it and see it everywhere, because it's a general kind of stance in the moment that is emotionally regulated, that is really one of awareness of what's going on in our experience, which really goes back to not just the Buddha, but Carl Rogers as well, who was so much talking about presence and being aware of our own experience as helpers and in life in order to be fully functioning. John Kabat-Zinn, who we had come to Santa Clara a few years ago, talked about mindfulness, or as the really one of the founding people, means paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. Of course, that's ideal, so we don't go into the stress cycle. We say, okay, there it is. This is difficult. And it also goes back to Gene Genlin, who was my teacher at the University of Chicago, focusing. So pay attention to something, don't dive into it, just be aware of it. Don't have that alarm reaction, don't have the fight or flight, don't go into the stress cycle, don't become sympathetically dominant. You want to be parasympathetically dominant. You want to be able to be aware of it. And if you need to go on, you need to go, okay, let's see, there it is, this difficult thing that I'm experiencing right now. Let's put it over here and I'll come back to it. Not to ignore it, but to pay attention to it and come back to it. That's how we regulate our emotions and we don't go into the stress cycle. So mindfulness is key for us as helpers and as individuals in terms of our approach. Self-compassion, and with helper secrets, they're very often, very much about beating ourselves up. Like, I failed with that patient, or I distanced myself from the patient, or if you're a caregiver, family caregiver, I didn't do enough, she's not happy with me, or he's not happy with me. It's endless, isn't it? The way we can basically beat ourselves up. So we have to have self-compassion, the way Kristen Neff writes about it and studies it. So self-kindness, are you kind to yourself when you're experiencing suffering? Do you get down on yourself when you see aspects of yourself you don't like? Who doesn't do that? But we have to stop that process and say, you know what? I have to love myself. I have to be friendly to all my experiences. I have to, and I know that sounds so humanistic, I have to love myself. You have to accept yourself. Love, it's probably the wrong term, but Carl Rogers really didn't mean, you just love everything. He means you accept, you have positive regard, you respect yourself and others. And try to realize that what I'm experiencing is part of the human condition. Others have the same experience. I bet anything that any of us in this room could come up with, like a difficult experience, somebody else in the room could say, I've had something just like that, or I'm struggling with that too. It's the fallacy of uniqueness that gets us in trouble. It's like, it's me. See, again, it's blaming ourselves and not the situation. If you're doing hospice work, for example, there's so much that comes with the territory. And some of the veterans in the room can give us endless examples of times when you're going to be challenged and you're not going to feel like I'm doing enough, or I'm not doing so well. Whoever thought we could be successful with everyone? That was only with Superman, Lone Ranger, and folks like that who were always successful, right? We are not always going to be successful. So that's that perfectionism, which is also something that we're all subject to, which is a high level of perfectionism. That's why you're in this room right now. You're doing deliberate kind of educational kind of experience. You're trying to, actually get better doing what you're doing. This is a very select group. In this group, we have la creme de la creme. Believe it, I know you're saying, oh, this is just empty praise. Seriously, you are not, you are here because you are really always growing and you're learning. I'm hoping that today there's something I share. I'm sure you have more to share with me than I am even sharing with you if we had time. But isolation, when I fail at something, I tend to be alone, feel alone, and that's where self-concealment comes in. Okay, one of the items in my self-concealment scale is when something bad happens, I tend to keep it to myself. Very bad, goes back to Dick Lazarus' ways of coping checklist. Very bad item in terms of if you answer it in the affirmative, you don't do very well. And when I fail at something important to me, I become consumed by inadequacy. Again, helper secrets to the max. So another thing we have to do, which goes back to Dick Lazarus, is, okay, how are we interpreting things? And this is what Seligman calls explanatory style. So back to the attributional kind of process, we have to stop thinking it's me, it won't ever change, and it's going to be like this all my life. That's depressogenic thinking. So personal, permanent, pervasive, depressogenic thinking. We have to understand that, hey, this is very situational. This isn't going to affect all the rest of my life. I can change. I can behave differently. You want to have behavioral responsibility, but you don't want to have characterological attributions to yourself, like I'm stupid, I am lazy. Oh, more data showing me that I am inadequate. Those are the kinds of attributions that get us in the most trouble. I have a fun exercise I used to do in retreats that Matt Weinstein, a friend of mine, taught me. He does this thing called Play Fair, where we put like a green monster on our back and have it say these things to you, like you're just lazy, you're stupid, all these negative. This is really negative self-talk in cognitive behavioral therapy. And then you say, get off my back. So we could do that exercise now. It'd be kind of fun to do it in the Zoom room. Get off my back. So, and you just kind of push this away and you go, wow, that feels really good, because I don't need that voice telling me I'm terrible constantly. So, I know it sounds dramatic and histrionic, but hey, this is for real. Our internal voices cause us a lot of problems, and we have to find a way to master them. This is what CBT is all about. And ultimately, also emotion focused therapy, two-chair, self-evaluative split, et cetera, and psychodynamic as well. So we got to go from this fallacy of uniqueness to solid support. And, there are many different kinds of support we need. We need technical appreciation. We need emotional support, just somebody who's on our side, constantly. We need shared reality. Somebody else could say, oh yeah, this is terrible. And, if you're in a medical setting, Schwartz round is one thing that's happening now where we stop and process things and reflect on things. So go from the fallacy of uniqueness. And what I would say to everybody, and I've been saying this during the whole COVID period, phone, text, email, Facebook, Zoom, do something, reach out. We have to do that. And now we've got to come out of our caves and try to get involved again. How many of you are like struggling? Raise your hand if you're finding it's like a little odd, isn't it, to start reaching out in the old way? It's not the same thing, is it? I know for me, it's strange. And to get back in the flow and get those, support systems going. Take care of yourself, self-care, restorative activities. We have a lot listed in the chat room. Do things for yourself that feel good, whether it's that walk or gardening or listening to the hummingbirds. Taking care of yourself, is so important. Saunas, baths, the things that I find that our group is not so great at because we're so focused on others. And to give yourself that gift. And, I had a supervisor at Berkeley who said, your responsibility is to basically take care of yourself because you're useless to the people you're helping unless you are feeling pretty good. Not just big red nose and happy kind of feeling good. I'm talking about deeper kind of happiness that comes from, the deeper well springs of who we are as humans. And this is a photo of my cup at Esalen looking out at the shoreline. That's nice. So we got to integrate and transform loss. Okay, this is my big quotation here, which is crazy to have, but the basic idea is this. This is way too long. What they found is this. Unpleasant emotions. The point I want to make is unpleasant emotions can propel the client on a healthy self-organizing trajectory. This is so academic, that reaches its completion as a meaningful, emotionally differentiated. Emotional differentiation is a big term right now in psychology and therapy, and integrative experience. The idea here is how feeling and meaning unfold in effective therapy can help unravel the paradox that the pain of loss actually helps to process the loss. This is that to change grief, you must experience grief. So just the idea that our emotions can guide us. This is very person-centered. I have a chapter on a person-centered approach to therapy, grief counseling. And it goes back to Carl Rogers that, our emotions can guide us through these experiences. They're not to be suppressed. They are to be learned from. Dick Lazarus said our emotions have the wisdom of the ages. So we have to tap into our emotions. They tell us, they guide us, they exist there to guide us. They have an evolutionary purpose, which is they tell us when things are not okay. And that goes back to the Gene Gemlin and the felt sense you have for every situation in your life. Is this situation okay? It's not always going to be up here in our cognitions. You have to pay attention here in our body where we live these experiences and then learn from that. So very important. I'm not making the point as effectively as I might, but I'm rushing. And then when we do that, we can have this post-traumatic growth, which we're all familiar with working with people that go through tremendously difficult experiences and they grow. We know with studies of people coping with cancer, we know it's true now for health professionals dealing with, a vicarious traumatization. And so the idea here is that you have this growth, but you don't have an absence of distress. So this is the important thing from the research, Tedeschi and others, is that it's not like all happy times. It's that you have substantive growth along with, you still have some distress. We never get away from that when we're doing real life things and we're not pulled up, and even then you have distress because of the distress of loneliness. But Anyhow, these are the things that people report over and over again that happen. And I'm sure that everyone in this room has experienced some of this, or you wouldn't be here right now. You know that there's the growth element to this work that's profound, that's made you who you are. And, to kind of end on this note of, really amazing research going on, looking at, I know this is the strangest Greek word, eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is this kind of Greek term for a kind of happiness that's more complete. It's different from just, like I went to a great movie and I enjoyed it, or a nice meal, which I certainly would enjoy, going out to some restaurants again and things like that. And, little things that make you feel good and happy, or I just got a raise at work. I don't know, whatever makes you feel better. But our work has deeper potential and greater potential in terms of bringing fulfillment. And that's what they're talking about with eudaimonia. And, this is what some of the great ones, the icons, although they all had their issues too, but let's not go there right now. But, Einstein, who said only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile. That's a lot to take on. I mean, that's a lot. Schweitzer, who said, I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I know, the only ones among you who will be truly happy are those who will have sought and found how to serve. Isn't that beautiful? He also said, if you lose your reverence for any part of life, you would have lost it for all of life. Yet here he is choking this fawn. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others, Martin Luther King? And there he had a photo of Gandhi in his office. So he was inspired by Gandhi. This gets transmitted, And Gandhi, was amazing. He said, whatever you do may seem insignificant. This is very important for all of us. It may seem insignificant, but it's very important that you do it. And you might say, well, he's talking about political action, but I think he's talking about everything in life, that we do. How many of you who are helpers, which I think most of us are helping in some capacity for sure, to be in this room, know about the effects of all your helping? You don't even hear from people. First of all, if you're in hospice, they don't want to ever see you again, even though they love you. Isn't that tough? That's kind of hard sometimes. You see somebody at Kmart or something, or at Safeway, and they kind of dodge you because you remind them, or they don't remember your name. God, you won't probably remember their name, but they feel totally indebted to you. The idea is that your helping is having an enormous effect, but you're never going to hear back, or not hear back as much as maybe we would like from an egoic kind of standpoint. Mother Teresa, there's joy in transcending self to serve others. And I always quote that David McClellan study where he showed films of her caring for the poor to Harvard undergraduates, and their immunological functioning improved. So just, at a cellular level, just seeing caring has this impact on us. This is how we're wired. What kind of design of nature would it be if caring for others was bad for us? Really, it wouldn't have worked. We wouldn't be here today. So it is not easy. It is not simple. It does take courage. But if we reflect on it a little bit, and you think about your efforts and all our efforts, because we're all going to be gone. Let's just be safe and say 100 years from now, who knows what medical developments. They may have us lying with tubes connected to us for the next, we can last another 50 years if we are so inclined. I'm not inclined. But your efforts are rippling out across the generations, so that family you helped, with a deathbed situation, those kids gathering around, when they're dying, they're going to gather 70, 80 years from now, they're going to gather their kids around. So, we're changing how people are living and how they're dying. The bereaved person who talks to you and then says, oh, it's so good to talk about this experience. Well, they might end up working in this field, or they might end up talking to somebody that they know who is suffering a loss, and find a way to do that. So these efforts ripple out, and as they do that, it'll be mainly out of your awareness, but to know that in your heart, I think, is absolutely key. And I began my book with this, and I usually end my talks with this, and I'll read it because it's this George Bernard Shaw quote. And forgive me, those of you who've heard me read this before. This is the true joy in life, the being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being thoroughly worn out before you're thrown on the scrap heap, the being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. Life is no brief candle to me. It is sort of a splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. So you bring a lot of light when it's very dark and warmth when it's cold. And I want to thank you for that. And I want to hear from you, like, what does all this mean for you? And also, are there any ideas here that you can take and say, I want to do this for myself? That's what I really hope the most, comes out of this, that you take this, something useful, and then put it to work and let it ripple, So anyhow, thank you. So let's have our conversation. Susan, you can orchestrate this somehow, I'm not sure.
Let me first unmute myself. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Dale. Good Lord. So much. So, brilliant talk. Thank you much. I have to leave. Okay, so let me come back here to anybody that has a question here or just something that they'd like to share. There's some clapping hands here, but if anybody wants to unmute Tom, and that Connie has her hand up, so why don't we have Tom speak and then Connie. Tom, if you could raise your hand, because then I could actually spotlight you. Otherwise, there's just this weird voice like coming out from the back room. And
can we put everyone on the screen? So
that's what we're trying to do, but he has to have his hand raised in order for me to find him.
Okay.
To do that. So Tom, I will be looking for you. I see you now. Perfect. Okay, let me add a spotlight. Okay. Why don't you go ahead now, Tom, and ask your question?
There I am.
Yeah, make a comment or a question.
You made a comment earlier about people helping if they haven't been trained and they don't know a damn thing about the person they're going to help. Something to that effect. And that reminded me of 50 years ago in Sausalito in Marin County. I had an opportunity to go to Jerry Jampolsky's Center for Attitudinal Healing.
Oh, yeah.
50 years ago.
Yeah.
And I told the secretary that I wanted to volunteer to help people. So that's a sign of my ignorance at that time. And so Jampolsky comes into the room and he introduces himself and he says, I understand you're here to help people. And what kind of training have you had? And I said, well, just, I go to the Unitarian Church. And that was enough for me, but it wasn't enough for him. And so he suggested, after taking care of me that afternoon, he says, Tom, you're not really here to help other people. First of all, you have to help yourself so that you can help other people. Mm. And it just woke me up because I didn't know that. I thought you just waltzed into a Center for Attitudinal Healing and you're assigned people and you help them. Mm. But you really don't. And so it took me 50 years to stand here and admit my foolishness 50 years ago. That's it.
Well, I would challenge the foolishness of it. I think you had a motivation to help, which I think is a noble thing. That's just my view, Tom. I'm not
sure it is.
Yeah,
and it was.
I think it was a noble thing. And I think also your Unitarian experience also taught you a lot about, Christian love and caring for others. So it's not that far afield. Also, you probably, and I from hearing you, I know you had what I call untutored talent. You had talent. It's just a matter of taking it and then, putting it to work. And yeah, we do need skills, and we do need communication skills, and we do need. And I think that I actually visited that Center for Attitudinal Helping way back when, But we need to take care of ourselves. And he's probably saying, hey, if you just jump into the melee here, you're not going to be able to manage, everything that comes up for you. So this is why it's the challenge of caring that I'm talking about today, because it's not easy. And I think everybody in the room knows that. You just can't go in and say, I'm the super helper, I'm going to help everybody. And you have to have complete awareness of what's going on for you, and boundaries and setting limits and all kinds of things like that. But I want to applaud your your motivations. And did you go on and how did you end up in this room?
Oh, I spent 20 years with him at that center, because I did take the 8 weeks of training.
Okay, all right.
Was assigned to groups once a week, and it was wonderful, wonderful.
Okay, well, you left that out. You left that out. You went on, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
fantastic.
it was terrific.
Good for you. Good for you. Yeah. Let's see, who do we have? Connie had somebody.
Could I just, I'm sorry to interrupt 1 second. Tom, I've been looking at you for months since you started coming to our events. And when you said the Center for Attitudinal, that's where I cut my teeth in the late 80s and facilitated groups for young children. We were probably there at the same time, maybe, during the AIDS epidemic, but I facilitated a young adults group for 13-year-olds to 20-year-olds with life-threatening illness. And then supported the children's for the kids under 10 group for so I've been looking at you and thinking, I met you at Channing House, I met you these other, and now I'm like, oh, the Center for Attitudinal Healing, it's even before then. Okay, thank you. And I think, Jerry said a lot of things, but one of the things that I most appreciate about what Jerry said was this idea that we're all students and teachers to each other, and that giving and receiving are the same thing. So that if you are considering yourself a helper and you need a person to be helped, it's not so much an equal relationship, but if you're looking at it from the vantage point of being of service to each other, then what you're giving, you're getting back. Like this is a thing that volunteers have said to me for decades. I feel like I get back so much more than I give. And I feel like this dynamic where you're serving from a place not of the other person being broken and needing to be fixed or helpless and you're going to help them, but really I'm here to be of service, because then I'm going to learn something and they're going to learn something, and the exchange is just so beautiful. So thank you for reminding me of that, because it was such an impactful experience for me. It changed my life. That's why I'm here now, So thank you. Connie, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Although, Susan, you probably just answered my question. Although someone just put in the chat, I think that's Rachel Naomi Remen who talks about being of service.
Rachel Naomi Remen does, yes. That is her helping, serving. And I've just lost you, Connie. I was going to post
I'm right next. Well, on my screen, I'm right next to you. I put my hand down.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to replace your spotlight there. Oops.
Okay,
and where's now? I've lost Dale.
He's right next to me too on my screen.
Yes, but okay, you can just go ahead and ask
I'll
the
keep
question.
Talking. So Dale, I was wondering, it's a wonderance, because it seems pretty solid that we've learned what you've been saying and established it through research over easily the last 20 years. And where it seems to still not take hold is in the people management. So administration, if you want to call it that, supervising others. I relate with my healthcare nurse colleagues, and that's the constant piece that I'm reading in their Facebook posts is about, especially related to COVID, how fatigued and burned out they are, and they're getting no relief, support, recognition. And so I'm wondering, are you seeing changes happening that from the business management angle that we're beginning to acknowledge this need?
Yeah, I tried to address this at chapter 7, not trying to sell my book, but chapter 7 of the book. I dealt with teams and healthy organizations. And yeah, it's, again, going back to the fundamental attribution error, I mean, it's the context. So you have these incredibly highly motivated, empathic people who come in. We know this from medical training, we know this from nursing training, and then they get the empathy pounded out of them, and they are put in impossible situations, and then they're told they're codependent. So you have to have a healthy organization. You have to have an organization in which everybody in this room, you have a mission to vision process that brought you in, right, to this mission to vision process. And that has to be aligned with the team's mission to vision process. And then the team's has to be aligned with the organization's mission to vision, right? And if that happens, then you have health, and then you have this healthy system. But if you don't have the health, like you're saying at the top, that has that really great alignment with the really core mission of each of the people working there, it's very, very difficult. And you have higher levels of stress. And a lot of it can be attributed to the fact that we have this for-profit healthcare system, and that really puts the focus in the wrong place, and it can really cause problems because the focus is on Wall Street and not on the bottom line, and not on, well, we're making extra money, let's give it back to the community. That's why I've always been a big advocate for community hospice programs, but I go way back to the 70s, with that, and that come out of the community and that are nurtured and nourished by the community. But yeah, no, it's a huge issue, and we need to create healthy systems. There's such a call too for compassionate care nationwide, but that does necessitate organizations providing a context in which that can flourish. So it's just a great point. I'm not an OD person, but I write about it in chapter 7, and I've tried to identify at least the features of teams that make for healthy functioning and less burnout.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you both. Anybody else that has anything that they would like to share, a story, a question, experience that they may have had? And if you may be too shy to speak, if you want to just put the question in the chat, you're welcome to do that.
I just cannot believe that this is a shy group. I'm looking around at this group. I can see a lot of people I know.
I know.
I see Brad Leary. I
saw Brad Leary too. Brad Leary.
I have heard speak in professional settings.
Me too.
Very, very, yeah. But anyhow, somebody share quickly. What's Carolyn,
how are you finding people, or because I don't see them raising their hand?
She's just raising her hand physically. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I want to just reiterate, just one time, I'll try to find Carolyn. I do see you perfect. That for people that would like to raise their hand, if you float your cursor to the bottom or top of your screen, click reactions, and you'll see it will say raise hand. But Carolyn, you're good to go. So just unmute yourself.
That moves you up to the upper left, so then we can all see you. Yeah. Carolyn, please,
unmute yourself, please. Just to make sure that you have your mic on, and you can do that by moving. Beautiful.
Could you do the Macarena also, Carolyn?
I'm not good with these computers, but I'm on.
Okay.
I just wanted to share a story. It's continually in my mind, but 40 years ago, I was a nurse at Stanford Hospital, had a very close roommate friend, and she got diagnosed with a metastatic cancer. And I told her, I will be there for you. And she lived up in Oregon. She and her husband, she had a year-old daughter. So I went up there, and I was the one in the hospital with her. Her husband was in a hotel with the baby, and her parents were in a hotel. And I was in this room, I guess 4 or 5 days during her dying process. I was frightened to death, did not know what I was doing, did not know what am I supposed to be doing. Asked the staff, why isn't my friend dying? She was on a morphine drip. They said she's in her 30s and she's got a strong heart and strong lungs, and this is going to take a while. So she passed on, and it was horrible. And I thought, I did not know what to do. How can I, and that stuck with me in my mind for, we were in our 30s, 40 years. And when I retired 7 years ago, I said, I'm going to hook up with hospice. I want to learn what you're supposed to do. And it didn't leave my mind. I thought, I've got to find out. It was sort of like a passion I had. I didn't feel like I did a good job. I didn't know what I was doing. So then to the current time, last October, another best friend of 55 years from college and whatever shared that she had a metastatic stage 4 cancer. She shared with me and her 3 adult daughters, and we had no clue. Her husband knew. So I told her, I said, I'm not leaving you. I am not leaving. So I took her husband and 3 daughters down the entire hospice journey, and I knew what I was doing. Because I'm a hospice volunteer with Hospice of the Valley. And I got trained so well. I said, oh my God, I'm patting myself on the back, which I normally don't do. and I knew what to do. So it just reminded me, I mean, just being trained and having knowledge, and from knowing nothing to feeling pretty confident about the journey that clients are taking and helping the family. So it's kind of like kudos to me. I felt good.
I think everyone in this room is feeling what I am, which is a deep appreciation for you, and that you
Well, for hospice
on that path, because you could have turned away from it.
No, I couldn't.
You could have said, well, I didn't know what to do, and I shouldn't do that anymore. Instead, you grew. You said, I'm going to learn.
Something inside me said, I have to know what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. And that's that growth, that you pursued and you found, and that's the helper's journey. That's my book right there.
I think about it every day. I mean, it's just happened a few months ago that so I thought, I've lost two best friends in my life, about 40 years apart. But I thought, how do you lose two of your best friends and then take them down this hospice, the end of life path?
Whether you were tutored, use the term, we used earlier, or not, you were untutored, then you were tutored. In either case, you did what was most important, which was you said, I'm going to show up. And
I did. I didn't leave.
You showed up. You showed up in both instances, and that's all we can do. We often don't know what to do. And even if you're very trained, you still don't know what to do. You just have to show up, and then you kind of figure it out. But thank you for sharing, Carolyn. That's
it's still, my heart's going to be broken for quite a while, but that's life.
Yeah, it is. We have Brad Leary, a friend, and
I felt the peer pressure. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, good. I wanted you to talk. Yeah.
Well, Carolyn, thank you for sharing. I actually am an employee of Hospice of the Valley. I'm a grief counselor. I've been with the organization for 17 years in various capacities. My thought is your colleague Bob Niemeyer, Dale, did an exercise I found to be really helpful for all of us during the pandemic. And what he did was he had everyone close their eyes, and he asked one simple question. He said, "What have you lost?" And he did that with a volunteer in his presentation. And, they could be deaths. They could be the loss of what we assume was going to happen in our lives. It was something that just grounded me. And I think that could be an important exercise for all of us to recognize the death and non-death related losses that we experienced over the last 16 months.
Yeah, thank you. That's really, I think all of us, just as you're describing it, are probably doing some inner Googling on that one. And, coming up with all of the different kinds of losses, primary, secondary, freedom, security, certainty, assumptive world getting turned, topsy-turvy. I mean, who would have ever believed the script if we had written it out 2 years ago? This is what we're going to go through. Nobody would have believed it. And that's true for all these major losses that our clients, patients bring to us. But thank you, Brad. That's really, really true for all of us, I think. And that's what we're kind of coming out of too. Like, how do we transform this loss and make meaning from it? How do we do sense making, which is something Bob talks about endlessly, about, well, we got to make meaning out of this. We've got to do some benefit finding. We've got to, meaning reconstruction, kind of constantly from these kind of experiences. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks for your good work too.
Could I just, Brad, I loved that you've just said this. For the last year, I've been saying to people pre-pandemic, would say things like, I said, the way we are introduced, or the way, like, the sort of currency of meeting new people is about, like, what do you do? What work do you do? Like, how am I going to value you based on how you, like, what? And I said, wouldn't it be a different, like, world if we introduced ourselves? We just see we're like, what loss are you navigating right now? And see, like, what the quality of the conversations that we would be having with people, instead of, like, setting up this hierarchical of, she probably makes more money, or, she makes less money, or, this whole way that our mind tries to, like, judge everybody and get everybody in the right order. But just this idea of starting there, like, what loss are you navigating right now? And then just see what happens. So that's a movement I'm starting. You're welcome to start it with me.
Well, I would really applaud that. I mean, that's the point I was making about that was my view of, in psychology or whatever, is that the sense of loss is what underlies, as I said, motivates and underlies compassion. So I was hoping with COVID, it was like wake everybody up, like everybody in this room knows this. We are as a different kind of group of people. And but the rest of the world was kind of like going, hey, there is loss. Oh my God, 600,000 people. There's death. People I know died. People are stressed. I'm having loss. I'm and all of a sudden the barrier was kind of taken away. And I'm hoping that it would wake everybody up, not just to all the different fault lines, the environmental grief we're experiencing, political grief, et cetera, COVID related grief. But you have an opportunity for us as a world to say, hey, we have to work together. We have to, and I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I was hoping that it would spur a tremendous increase in, empathy and compassion. But yeah, no, I'm joining the movement with Brad and Susan. Let's do it. Yeah, somebody else, please. What did it bring up? You have so much.
Yes, I'm going to take Brad out of here. Thank you. I also want to just say this to anybody who is in this group right now, interested in exploring this. I love, Carolyn, that you became a hospice volunteer. For 22 years. I was a hospice volunteer coordinator. And I will say to anybody that really wants to explore caring and just the opportunity to see how other people die and start to get some sense of what would work for me and what absolutely would not work. I was with somebody recently. I said, you know what? This is now number one on my top 10 list of ways I do not want to die. So I'm so glad that you've let me in here, because this is not how I want to go. So just beautiful that people can be trained to do this and then provide such a beautiful service, mostly to other people that they don't know, they would never meet in any other circumstances, but also for your own friends and family. So thank you all. Carolyn, you have your mic off. Would you like to say something else? Or are you good? Or
I thought it was.
Oh, that's okay. And so there is another question here that's in the chat from Maria Elena. I'm curious about your thoughts about a realization that I had when I was living through the grief related to my mother's death. I realized that nothing is the same, and yet everything is the same. The world just continues on. Do you have anything to say about that?
The experience I find is that anyone who's had a major loss kind of has a marker and says, I had life before and life after. And that's always an experience that I encounter. And it is shocking to see the world going on. And it's hard for people. I think, like with my bereaved clients right now, they're seeing the world picking up now, but they're still without their loved one, and now the world is getting right back into its normal flow. And when it was still, it actually was more comfortable in a way, because they had a chance to kind of reflect and be with their loss. But now they're thrown back into the tumult of everyday life, of conferences and work and in person. What's it like to go back into in-person experiences when you're bringing a whole new self? You have a new identity. You have a loss that you have to talk about. So when I see Jan at the office or somewhere, and I say, Jan, how's the family? And Jan says, she says to herself, do I tell Dale about the loss of, my husband or my son? Or it's really a struggle for people because life is going on. I don't know if that, Maria, I don't know if that's answering it, but yeah, it is really, it's one of those things that I think, it's so hard for people because and we are different. I think that the change in identity that happens with grief, is really significant, and everybody wants you to be the same. So Maria, be the same, be the same person. I don't want to change person. I want you to go back to being the same person. And that's a lot of social pressure when you feel different. And so if I relate to Jan the same way, and I say, Jan, well, come on. And you're saying, well, I don't feel like that right now. And I go, oh no, she's depressed. I got to do something to change her. That's not going to be helpful. And I don't want to hear the whole story because I don't want to hear this loss every week, at Starbucks. These are not always Starbucks conversations. And that's where I think we as professional helpers really play a vital role, because the rest of the world doesn't respond sufficiently, can't very often respond sufficiently to some of these more difficult loss experiences. Yeah, gosh, it's actually 3:30 now.
It is, Dale.
Yeah.
That question, Maria Elena, I want to just share with you the first significant death I had when I cared for my first friend who was dying, which shocked me. I was 30. I'd avoided death like a champion for 30 years, actively avoiding it. So this last 33 have been pretty interesting. But when my friend died, I was so distraught, and I was grief stricken afterwards, and I didn't have any place to land that. I wasn't sure what it was. And I remember speaking to my sort of best friend who called me at work one day at the stock market to ask me how I was doing. And I just said, these people are being ridiculous. Doesn't anybody understand the value of life and death? Because I'd had this sort of momentous experience. I went on and on. I said, I'm just done. I'm not speaking to anybody that doesn't understand how to navigate this. And there was the longest pause in the world. And he said, well, you're going to be a very lonely girl then. And I realized, because he said, Susan, how could somebody understand the experience you're having without going through it themselves? You're 28 or whatever, 30. And the reality is many 30-year-olds, well, we were just at the cusp of the AIDS epidemic, so that changed very quickly within a year. But at the time he was right. It just reminded me to have a little bit of patience with people who have not had these experiences, and they may not be the best supporters.
Susan, I have to share just a quick, I haven't shared this for 30 years, but it was a support group I was leading with hospice folks. And the nurse, the chief head nurse, she told the story. She was at Safeway, and she had just left the hospice where 2 of her patients were dying, couldn't even take water. They couldn't do anything. And she's in line at Safeway, and the woman in front of her is going, why don't they not have 2 things open right now? I can't believe this. This is just, she's just going on and on and on. And this nurse turned to her and said, she just said, I can't believe I did this. She almost yelled at her and said, ma'am, you should be happy you can stand in this line. Completely freaked out the woman. The woman got to another line, scared her pants off, but it's just a feeling you have, come on now, impermanence of life. This is not significant. Get a perspective. Mm-hmm. And that's the perspective I think we all have, that maybe makes for some wisdom. And this is a very wise group I could talk to all day, but I really appreciate your time. And Susan, I want to say thank you let's hear it for Susan for all her great work at Mission. She has been a godsend to the Bay Area and beyond. So thank you.